My dad gained a high-paying job when I was 9 or 10, forcing us to move from rural Pennsylvania to Rockville, Maryland. Though I say forced, it may not be the best description. My folks were excited to move and scarcely considered it. Within a month, we moved from a little decrepit house in a low-income region to a big property in one of Maryland's loveliest suburbs. You may wonder how I felt about it. I didn't have any lifetime pals at that age because I was antisocial and kept to myself. Years later, my parents told me that giving me a fresh start was one reason they were willing to disrupt our life, but that's irrelevant. I adjusted swiftly to the relocation and didn't mind. Considering the circumstances, adjustment wasn't hard. Since the house was big, even my 10-year-old self could tell we wouldn't be trying to make ends meet. I'll tell you what you need to know about the houses inside, not unnecessary information. I have older brothers, Sean and Harold. The backyard was our favorite because of its large plot of twisting hedges, excellent for hide-and-seek, tag, and other games. The right-edge treehouse was the property's outstanding feature. Each house on the block was divided by a wide cluster of tall trees, and the treehouse was in that patch. Though I say treehouse, it was more like a castle. It was huge, covering 6 or 7 trees, unlike your dad's weekend endeavor. It had 3 stories and a working staircase, not those weak planks. The construction was clearly professional. My brothers and I played in the treehouse every day, making it the highlight of our day. Finally, my brothers got tired of the treehouse. They were older and at that dreadful teenage time when nothing was cool. I was the only one who played up there, which stinks. I was devastated about being abandoned up there, but my brothers wouldn't come back no matter what I said. After climbing inside the treehouse, I spotted a folded paper in the corner. I vividly recall the first note's words, "Hello. My name is Marshmallow Man. Nice to meet you. What's your name?" I was the happiest kid ever. I thought one of my brothers was playing with me, so I joined in to re-engage them in the treehouse. I immediately took one of our markers and wrote back, putting a note with my name on a new stack of paper in the treehouse. I put it where I found the first one, eager to play this new game. So I didn't ask my brothers which one was the Marshmallow Man that night because I was frightened they'd quit playing. I ran straight to the treehouse after school for a few days. Another note awaited me each time. Initially, the notes sounded like my brothers' conversations. I enjoyed it, but the sounds got odd over time. My brothers asked me confusing questions like, "What's your favorite time of day to play outside?" The Marshmallow Man started asking me more intimate questions. "What do you usually eat for breakfast?" Some of his questions will always linger with me, such as, "Which window in the house is your bedroom?" Looking back at that question makes me queasy. I answered every question with confidence, since I still thought it was one of my brothers. But the following note was so frightening I couldn't keep quiet. Like, "What do your pajamas smell like?" Or something similarly awful. I barged in and demanded to know who wrote the notes. They laughed at me and denied it. Both of them swore the Marshmallow Man didn't exist and teased me for playing pretend. I hurried, crying, from the room. I recall feeling depressed and angry. I knew someone was lying. Instead of going to my parents, I planned to catch them. Not expecting what was about to happen, I heard tapping at my window while sleeping that night. My heart started racing as I froze. The tapping made me even more afraid of the dark, which I couldn't handle. I stayed there in the dark for hours, afraid to move. Forced myself to sleep. I nearly screamed when I opened the curtains the next morning. Dozens of marshmallows were taped to my window. Must be my brothers. This was no longer hilarious because I was irritated. I decided to capture them red-handed. I pretended not to see the marshmallows the next night and didn't talk to them all day. Later that night, I was ready for the tapping again. I got out of bed and opened the curtains to yell. It wasn't my brother on the other side of the glass, but an elderly, filthy man with yellow eyes and rotten teeth. With spotty hair, he smiled at me as I looked. Probably never shouted louder. I thought I was dying then. My parents ran to my room, but the man was gone. It was big. The officers investigated the yard and treehouse extensively, but found nothing. Even after searching the region, that man was never found. Our neighbors came outside to see what was going on and were appalled when my parents told them. I told police and parents what I knew, but I couldn't say much. They admitted the notes as evidence, although I doubt they accomplished anything with them. That man never returned. My parents told me never to play in the treehouse again, but I didn't want to after that occurred. Since I moved out, my parents still reside there, and every time I visit, I take a closer look at the treehouse. This is one of my scariest memories. Recent thoughts have centered on this recollection. Luke, my youngest son, just started college, and while I'm proud of him, the house is quieter than ever, too quiet. Interesting, when the kids are small, you fantasize of peace and quiet, but when it comes, it's not as soothing. Strangely, his leaving released a part of my brain that forgot what I'm about to say. My wife and I have been informed it's common to think more about our kids' childhood at this time, so it's not shocking. I remember him as a child, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into stuff. However, one recollection from that time is not all rainbows and sunshine. The event occurred when Luke was 8. I still don't understand it. My trade is carpentry, so I've always been handy. I remember being more active and willing to do homemade tasks. The backyard treehouse I constructed for Luke is still standing and is one of my favorite projects. The platform was attached to a tree, but I put my heart into it. Walls, a roof, wooden steps to the entrance. It was strong too. I succeeded in making it feel like an extension of our house to him. Christy, my wife, initially thought it was too high and unsafe. Since Luke was always climbing trees, I thought it would be safer to give him a ladder than let him climb branches that could break. Christy eventually agreed, and Luke adored it. Maybe I should tell you about our property to clarify the story. Our house was at the end of a dead-end street in a wooded region, and Christy and I fell in love with it because the backyard bordered the woods. It was quiet and pleasant, and we enjoyed being alone. I still giggle at how many times friends and family have gotten lost trying to find our house. The yard wasn't big, but I could see the treehouse from our bedroom window, which helped me decide where to build it. I wanted to monitor it in case Luke harmed himself. The walls blocked my view of the inside, but I could see the steps leading up to it. Everything was normal for a long time, I think. Luke played in the treehouse fairly often. Luke generally played alone because his older brother had outgrown it. I don't remember when, but he mentioned Jake, an imaginary acquaintance. Jake was an imagined friend because no one in the area had a child named Jake. Kids often had imaginary companions, but Luke was 8, not the age for that. Christy found it adorable and harmless, but I was wary. Luke never made imaginary pals, so it looked unusual. It didn't bother me because he was 8. Christy and I became increasingly concerned when Luke started spending more time up there. I was surprised he wasn't taking toys up there. He seemed to solely play with his mind. He didn't have a game console or anything to entertain him, and I told him not to carry anything up there because it was dangerous and I didn't want him to fall. My curiosity led me to ask him about it. Luke had a bizarre answer when I asked about his friend, saying Jake was shy and didn't appreciate being talked about. When I questioned him why he spent so much time up there, he said Jake just liked playing in the treehouse and didn't like coming inside. I honestly have no words. It seemed odd. Were imaginary buddies meant to be accessible anytime you needed them? Later that day, I discovered that some youngsters only play with their imaginary companions in certain rooms. As strange as that was, I accepted it. However, Christy was uneasy. She believed Luke was overdoing the imaginary friend idea, and I agreed. We were helicopter parents. We allowed our kids to spend their spare time any way they wanted as long as they did well in school and did their chores. Luke played bikes, tag, and other games with the local kids until sunset most weekends. We trusted Luke to behave and avoid trouble because they were all decent kids. Luke never picked on other kids or fought, so I was worried when he came home one Saturday with a black eye. I watched him and inquired what happened. He glanced at the floor and didn't say anything, but I requested he tell me so I wouldn't be furious. What he said next made me shiver. He glanced up and informed me he fought Jake. I had to figure out whose kid Jake was before realizing he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him to stop lying and stop being funny. Luke cried and rushed to his room instead of confessing. Christy believed he had fought a neighborhood youngster and didn't want to admit it. Yes, I agreed. She wanted me to remove the treehouse immediately, but I couldn't. It took weeks to build that treehouse, so ripping it down bothered me. I assured her I would tell Luke he was overstepping. Luke wouldn't leave his room or talk to me all day, so I couldn't obtain anything from him. The next day, I investigated. Seeing what I saw in the treehouse made me queasy. Some soiled and worn children's socks and footwear were scattered. I knew none of them belonged to Luke or my oldest son. We had donated all his old shoes a long time ago. Food wrappers, bags, cutlery, and 2 filthy dishes were also up there. The weirdest thing was that all the walls had pencil drawings of foxes, bears, and deer. I don't recall them all, but they were animals. A huge spider with a penciled-in face struck out to me the most. It was freaky. I instantly dove down and questioned Luke about the treehouse. He informed me Jake only liked to converse when he was full, so he brought him food and snacks. It was subsequently revealed that Jake owned the shoes and socks and was generally forgetful. The end. Luke was banned from the treehouse after that. I wanted to punish him until he acknowledged lying. I was certain Luke had found those items in the neighborhood and was lying to cover it up. Christy and I are concerned about Luke's mental health. We considered professional help if things persist. Something I saw one night altered everything. I saw movement near the treehouse through the bedroom window. I was furious that Luke was disobeying me, but then I saw a pale, frail-looking child climbing down the treehouse steps. He didn't look like Luke or the local youngsters. He was filthy and moved like he hadn't eaten in days. I raced outside yelling at the youngster to stop. After I opened the back door, the youngster ran into the woods. He disappeared into the trees in seconds as I chased him. Christy contacted every neighbor, but their children were safe. The officers searched the woods for nearly an hour, but discovered nothing. Local youngsters had not been reported missing. Everything seemed inexplicable. With my cooperation, the police questioned my son about that boy, and his answers were frightening. Jake said he was a magic boy who lived in the woods with his companions. He named his friends bears, foxes, and other animals. Jake begged my kid to leave his family and join him in the woods with his friends every time he visited. He got upset when Luke refused and made odd noises. I don't know why Luke never told me, and I felt guilty for putting him at risk. A thorough police search of the woods yielded nothing. Jake disappeared after that. Christy was always superstitious and thought Jake wasn't real. I don't believe in it, but her discourse about it always unnerves me. Which explanation is scarier? That a paranormal entity was engaging with my son, or that woods folk were hiding in the forest behind my house? This happened weeks ago, so I'm still remembering it. I'm a college sophomore in California from a sleepy Delaware suburb. I was home for a few days over fall break in October. I return home whenever possible, which is bittersweet. I love my parents, but their traditionalism can be suffocating. Even though pot is legal here, their weed phobia drives me insane. Knowing I smoked would drive them insane. They've never adjusted to my adulthood. Though I don't understand their stance, I'd never insult my parents, especially while I'm living with them. When at home, I must skulk to escape detection. I hate to say it, but I've mastered sneaking around my folks. I lost count of the times I sneaked away at night, let alone all the other mischief I did. My dad has a bloodhound nose, so smoking inside isn't possible. Thankfully, my backyard treehouse remains. My parents built it for me when I was a youngster, and it's held up well despite being worn and creaking. Being high in the trees hides it from view, especially from the home. I can see the yard, street, and some house windows from up there, but no one can see me unless they know where to look. That treehouse was my escape route when I was younger, which was often. I'll get to the topic, but all the old memories make it hard to talk about. On the Saturday before I was meant to travel back to school, my parents were at a late-night banquet. I knew they'd be gone for hours, but I didn't know when. I ascended into the treehouse with my stockpile to avoid being caught in the backyard. I could see my breath in the cold air. Maybe it's just me, but cold weather makes me nostalgic. It was calm up there and great to be alone. I've always liked being high, so it added to the experience. I contemplated school at sunset, eager to return. I finished when it was mostly dark, so I timed things well. That's when I noticed. As I scanned the yard, a home light turned on. Knowing I was alone at home chilled me. As I looked out the window, my heart raced with that innate panic that only comes from real danger. My area of vision closed in on that light, as if sucking me in. A few moments later, backyard movement jolted me awake. 3 hooded people circled the property, apparently moving fast. Realizing what was happening, my stomach fell. 3 figures moved to the front steps as I observed. They entered when a 4th figure unlocked the door. My chest clenched when I realized my house was looted. I didn't know what to do, but I kept looking. That's the best way I can describe what I felt, paralyzed and attempting to believe what I was witnessing. 1 figure paced the yard outdoors. Some subconscious part of me clicked when I looked down and held my phone with the keypad open. I instinctively called 911 on my phone app and whispered to be quiet. I informed the operator and hung up. He looked up into the trees as I placed my phone away, maybe because the screen light grabbed his attention. I hid, but I feared he saw me. I got my answer in 3 seconds. I heard someone shout, "Hey!" clearly at me. A dark figure walked toward the tree base as I peered around one of the wooden floor pieces. He knew where I was sure. From the tree's base, he climbed the wooden planks to the treehouse. I shouted that the police were coming to scare him off, but he kept climbing, his hands grasping the planks like he was trying to reach me. I instinctively grabbed my bong, the only thing nearby, and tossed it hard. It hit him in the head and broke into a million pieces, and he cursed before falling. Though low, his height made him reconsider. Instead of climbing back up, he raced back to the home and shouted at the other guys inside. Next, all 4 ran to my backyard, where they probably entered and exited. My heart kept racing. Within 3 minutes, police arrived. I thought I would fall as I descended from the treehouse, since I was shaking. The words I used to explain what happened were sloppy. I said I hadn't seen a getaway automobile and hadn't seen their faces. My parents arrived soon after, and I appreciated their sympathy. My parents were gone that night, so the police said the burglars must have planned it. My presence wasn't planned for. Still unsure how to feel. I hate to think what might have occurred if he had reached the treehouse. I'm back at school, but I haven't slept well since this happened. I'm afraid they'll return, and my parents are alone. I'm terrified for their safety and hope we never hear from them again. I hope to never have to update, but if necessary, I will. I experienced a nightmare at home as a child. I don't recall my birth house because my family moved here when I was 4. My childhood residence was my home from age 4 to age 14. I adored that house and have many childhood memories. We moved out of state when I started high school, which was a nightmare, but that's not the story. My childhood backyard had a treehouse. Believe it or not, the previous owner built it for his kids. My parents liked the house and backyard since they were kid-friendly. According to my parents, my elder brother Kyle, who is 2 years older than me, was 6 when they bought the house, and we were enthusiastic about the backyard treehouse. My brother and I played in the treehouse with long-time acquaintances. I stopped playing in the treehouse as the years went by. By 12, I stopped playing in the treehouse. However, I was a troublemaker at this age and often got in trouble with my parents. I was regularly grounded and threw temper tantrums, causing a lot of yelling at home. My dad grounded me one weekend after my guidance counselor repeatedly criticized my behavior and grades. As an unhappy, irritating preteen, I felt I despised my parents. I refused to sleep at home that night. I slept in the treehouse with blankets and pillows. My parents knew I did this before and didn't care. It was my small rebellion. Despite not being allowed to play video games or watch TV, my dad didn't know I had my Nintendo DS. I played Animal Crossing for hours before falling asleep. I guess I was only sleeping for a few moments. I don't think I reached REM sleep yet when I heard the voice outside shouting my name, Tommy. Tommy. As I woke up, I was bewildered. It could have been my dad's voice. Tommy, are you up? The voice said. I only remember a deep, adult man's voice. I didn't respond because my heart was racing. I observed someone put their head through the floor aperture in the near pitch-black darkness after hearing the ladder steps squeak as someone came up. I saw their head shadow, not their face. "Ah, there you are," he remarked. After I said, "Dad," he stopped responding for 20 seconds. I stared at this head I assumed was facing me. While waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, I knew that wasn't my dad. I stood up and screamed, "Dad," at the treehouse window as loud as I could. My parents' room light turned on, and I heard footsteps hurrying down the ladder to the treehouse. My parents burst out via the back door moments later, and my dad swore he wasn't pranking me. My parents believed me, unlike some ridiculous horror movie where the parents refused to believe the kid. My dad called my uncle, a cop at the time, for guidance, and my uncle reported the incident the next day. No other information except that I heard a deep man's voice, saw his head, and he knew my name. The police have little to work with. I never slept in the treehouse again. My dad believed it was one of our neighbors across the street, but he couldn't verify it. I tried to remember the voice from that night any time I saw him outdoors, and he said hi for years, but I couldn't. I keep it as a disturbing mystery.